I'm James Nuri. This is Jeffrey Kunkler. We're going to present on converting electric kilns to atmospheric. If everyone would please turn their cell phones off. Give you a moment. And then at the end of the talk, we'll be open to questions. If everyone would use the center microphone there in the aisle, and just be patient. I'm sorry? Get closer? Yeah, direct me here. How's this? Is that better? Is this bad? This is better? All right. I like it. Okay. So, Jill? Yeah, come on up, Jill. No, you're all right. Thank you, everybody.
Sorry, guys. I'm a few minutes late.
No worries. Perfect time.
No problem. I got my notes and everything. Good afternoon, my friends. I'm so sorry that you waited for me. I'm Jill Oberman, a board member, and it is our fine privilege as board members to get to introduce some of these lectures, so I'm so happy you're here. I couldn't find the fourth floor. I was on the other side trying. I'm so sorry. Well, that I knew, but it is not above the third on the other side. Anyway, I'm so glad you're here. You all are here for electric to atmosphere, right? This is the place. Fantastic. So I'm here to introduce Jeffrey and James right here. And I just want to tell you a little bit about them. But before we do that, please remember to do a few things, a few business things. Silence your cell phones, please, if you haven't been reminded that a million times today. Please silence your cell phone so it doesn't disturb the lecture. We would love to encourage you all to keep using the app to rate your experiences at this conference. It helps us with programming. And also, if you haven't voted for board member candidates, please check your email and please take care of that. It stops today at 4. Okay, you guys ready? Jeffrey here is a clay artist, and he resides in his hometown of Joplin, Missouri. He received his MFA from the University of Kansas, and that was in 2011, and his BFA from the Missouri State University in 2006. He is currently the studio manager at Phoenix Fired Art, where he both teaches and makes his artwork. And James Nuri is a clay artist also, surprising at this conference. He received his BS in sociology with an emphasis in ceramics from the University of Kansas. There he found his love for clay and for glazes. And he currently resides in Lawrence, Kansas, and divides his time between care work, ceramic research, and making pottery. Please welcome James and Jeffrey. Thanks, guys.
So me and Jeffrey met at KU while he was getting his MFA. I was getting my bachelor's in sociology and ended up having an interesting degree. Dave Vertashnik, my professor and mentor, allowed me to come into the ceramics department and work. And during that process, we developed a very close relationship. During that time, I was able to fire anagamas, salt kilns, soda kilns, these wonderful, beautiful kilns that a lot of us really want. And outside of this university setting where we have almost an infinite amount of resources, we're able to do those things. Outside of that, it costs money. $10,000 for a kiln, $20,000. You want to build an anagama, it's going to cost money. So when I was reaching the end of my degree, realizing I was leaving KU and graduating, I sat down with Dave Vertashnik and I said, I want to keep doing these things. How do I do this? I was like, I can't afford these kilns. I can't afford to do this. You know, I have bills to pay, loans to pay. And so we sat down and we're like, what can we do? What can we salvage? How can we make this work? So we took a kiln that had recently gone a little nuclear and melted down, and developed a process of working with the bricks and preparing them. Dave had a product called ITC, which is a refractory product that you can coat kilns in, refractory brick, soft brick, and it helps bump up the reflection value and then also gives you a nice protective coating. That costs money. And so I ran into another roadblock. How do I afford to do that? So Dave said, well, there's this thing called poor man's ITC. You know, we can work on a version of this that is affordable, that we can make ourselves. I was like, all right, let's do this. You know, so over the process of that, really last semester I was there, we worked on this, worked on making these refractory washes. How do we protect it? How do I survive a salt environment, a soda environment? How am I introducing wood? You know, things that really aren't supposed to be happening with soft brick. You know, so during that journey, I went through this process of learning, seeing what is possible, and trying to really inform myself as much as possible. With my degree in sociology, these things are important to me. Information is important. Learning from people is important. Proliferation of information is very important. Surprise, surprise, I'm a socialist. Yes, I know, pottery. So with that, I wanted people to have access to this. I want people to be able to fire this way. I want people to be able to achieve these things without going broke. You know, we all have a certain sensibility of the things we want. You're here. We work with earth, we work with clay, and we want to work with our hands. But at the same time, that can become expensive. And that's something that we need to find a way around, and a way to communicate and teach each other. So with that, I went through this process of developing this kiln and firing this kiln. I was very lucky that Jeffrey here invited me to Joplin to do a 2-month residency there. He had all these materials, talking about making a soda kiln. I was like, well, let's just do it. Let's build a soda kiln. I showed him what I'd been working on, what was possible, what I'd achieved, and Jeffrey took it and said, this is what I want to do. This is how I'm going to process this. And he went down his own journey and found many things for himself and what he's doing. And I find that quite lovely that we have two people doing something similar, but finding our way through it all. And I would like to hand this off to Jeffrey to start talking about the process and how we get there.
So while I got to get used to this, excuse me. So while I'm getting ready to start, James is actually going to hand out some of my pots. I fired a kiln right before I left for NSECA, and this is probably my best firing yet. And these pots show sort of a proof of concept. So he's going to hand them around to the corners of the room, and please feel free to pass them around, handle them, look all over. There's a couple of them that have a few shards in them, and that's because I blew up my cone pack, and I still do that. That's something that I rush things, so there might be a few things on there. But you could see that I'm getting soda on these pots, and I'm hitting a high temperature. So we'll start with this first slide. And this is what I started out with. These are all materials that were scavenged, okay? This kiln cost $400, all right? And, you know, as James spoke, some of these kilns can be so cost prohibitive. And when you come out of school, it's like, how do you continue to make that work that you've worked on for so long? I mean, it's hard, and it can be heartbreaking at times when you lose the ability to make your work. And so these things that you're seeing right here, I've got an old Paragon kiln, and I think I've got an old, like an old L&L or something along those lines. And then lots of shelves. These were all donated. A guy drove up one time and said, give me $500 for this stuff. And I told him no. I was like, it's not worth $500. And he said, will you give me 3? And I said, no. Will you give me 1? No. I said, you can leave it here if you want, or you can take it away. And he left it. Okay. And so I get this kind of often, you know, being that clay guy in my hometown where people come around, they know what I do, and they've got extra stuff. And for you guys like that are looking at doing this, I mean, check Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, Facebook groups. There's always somebody giving away a kiln or selling a kiln cheaply. Just look for kilns that, you know, where the brick isn't really crumbling, you know, where there's not a lot of water damage, those sorts of things. So this next slide shows James, you know, sort of tearing apart the bottom of this kiln. The Paragon, we've got to strip all of the electronic information out of this, all the guts of it. We're pulling, you know, the elements, those sorts of things, the computers, that stuff out, strip it all out. And then we took the bottom of this kiln out and started to crush it up, all right? Grind it up a little bit further. And then we're adding that back into a slurry of water, sawdust, and fire clay. Now this is the basis for our castable cement. So we're using the kiln that we just tore apart, and then we're putting it right back together to fill up the element channels. So right over here you can see 3 different rings of an electric kiln, and this is us stuffing the you know, this castable back into these rings, and it really tears up your hands. You know, it's like a really gritty sort of stuff. You got to push it in there, get it in there really nice and tight, and we use a wooden rib to really scrape those surfaces to make them nice and flat, So, that flame can just lick up those walls without any interruption. Okay, so this next one's just a little closer. You can see a little bit more. Okay, this is one of the things that you find along the way of doing things, and it is a computer controller that's probably 30 years old. It was off the front of one of these Paragon kilns, and I was wondering, it's like, trying to do things as cheap as possible. The most expensive thing for this kiln was the burners, and Heather Grills actually bought those for me. It was just a wonderful thing. They're $325. I could have made them myself. I could have, but that takes a lot of skill, and there are people that know how to do it much better than me. And if that's something I wanted to focus on, I feel like I could have spent some time on making my own burners. But so my kiln cost $400. Burners cost $325 of it. The rest of it is all scavenging. So what you're seeing here is the back of a computer computer controller for an electric kiln. And what I decided is I was going to try to use this as a pyrometer for my kiln. So I cut off the 220 wires that were connecting it, and I attached an old lamp cord to it, and then plugged it in, and then I got an error message. But once I started pushing buttons, it said 70 degrees. So I was like, you know what? This is actually telling the temperature right now. So perhaps I'm going to try this and see if it works. So this is sort of the joys, like you find these little things that you can try along with making these kilns. So, I was starting on an Unlevel Surface. So I used sand to sort of level myself out. I had this idea that this thing could be portable. It's not. But so I put it on a pallet that I could lift with a forklift, which, may come in handy. But you can see I got a layer, I got the pallet, then I've got a layer of concrete board, which is hardy backer board, and then a layer of cinder block. And this is really kind of overkill, to be honest, and 2 layers of fire brick. And the reason why I have 2 layers of fire brick is that all the layers of fire brick that we have are arch bricks. So in order to get them to have a straight bottom, you got to pile them on top of each other. So, really serious stuff here, All right, so this is what the beginnings, the first iteration of my kiln looked like. And I will say, the first couple times that you guys do this, expect craziness to happen. It's about trying to learn what these kilns can do and how to get them to do what you want to do. And the first time you do it, you're going to have kilns that could be octagonal or rectangle. They could be, whatever shape. So your experience is going to be a lot different than mine. And each time I do this, I try a different iteration or a different set of variables to get closer to what I'm looking for. Okay. So this first step, I have channels on either side, and that's where my burners are coming in. I decided what I was going to do is build a channel up underneath the rings of the electric rings and have it sort of come up through it as an updraft. So I'm blowing in sideways. There's 3 bricks that are sort of in that circle pattern. That's the start of my stack. And then the middle brick is sort of a brick that I can slam that fire right up into and sort of deflect it to the side. So it's not just blowing against each other, So I'm starting to add a layer, and I wash as I go. I take this wash that we've made. I've started calling it working potter's wash. And it is a mixture of 1/3 kyanite, 1/3 Zircopax, and 1/3, what was the other one? Alumina hydrate, I'm sorry. Okay. And when you, okay, and I will say that I wrote an article in the NCECA journal, and it's on pages 142 and 143. And this recipe is in there along with the recipe for my castable or our castable. Okay. So, and we will have a site that you guys can access later on with this information where we'll continue to post pictures and that sort of stuff. And I'll give you that information in a bit. So each ring I'm coating with this wash. And this wash is a highly refractable wash. If you get the kyanite, I recommend getting as fine of kyanite as you possibly can because it tends to want to sink out of your slurry whenever you're painting it on. Some people will spray it. I paint it, and I paint it thinly. And sort of one layer is just fine, okay? I do the tops of the kiln, the bottom of the kiln, every surface of soft brick that I can possibly find. Coat every little bit of it. So again, starting to move up. This is before I've even fired this kiln, so there's still a lot of, sawdust and stuff in here. And so when you take your first firing, you need to go a little slow because you got to burn all that sawdust out. All right. So the top of my stack here, I've got, you can see my thermocouple coming in. And in order to get that to where you're not just totally covering it in soda or caustic material every time, I'm also coating that in my wash. I give that a soak in my wash before I fire each kiln. Okay. So, and there's my makeshift pyrometer. Okay, so this is what it looks like in the end, and that's 8 foot tall. and I stopped putting rings on top of it when I realized that I had to get a ladder to, put pots into it, and I thought it might get dangerous. I mean, seriously, this is the first time I ever fired it, so what if it fell over? Who knows, So that's a 100-pound tank of propane, too. And my firings, at least the way I experience it, and I'm trying to get that lower and lower, of course, because I love that idea that, 1 cup pays for a firing. That's a wonderful thing. But right now, 2 cups will pay for a firing. So it's about $40 to $50 worth of propane to fire this. All right. So the first firing, wildly inaccurate. Just all kinds of crazy heat problems, super, super hot on bottom, and we're talking bisque temperatures on top. But I had the full range. I had the full range of, cone 10, 11 down at the bottom, and then cone 6, and then earthenware temperatures, and then bisque. And so then when I get it opened up, I realized down at the bottom that, it actually worked. I had some soda-covered pots. Now, the rest of them kind of look like crap, but down low, there it was. So, is the incentive to sort of move forward to this next idea. It didn't work. What can I do to change that? All right, so there's my pyrometer. Last time I fired it, I got 2607 on it. And I'm sure that's not accurate, but it gets a little confused once it gets above 2300 degrees. All right, so is that video working? Anybody see that? Okay, so here it goes. Maybe, perhaps, okay. All right, well, that's what my kiln looks like at night. This is the one where it failed. I was at the end, I stalled out for 5 hours, and I'd done everything I could to try to figure out what to make it go up. And finally, I was like, well, it's time to take pretty pictures. So I pulled all the ports and, took this wonderful video of this. It kind of looks like a rocket ship, I think. So when I opened it up, this is what I got. This is what the surface of that looked like, the bottom part too as well. So closest to the soda because I put a bunch of soda in bottom. I didn't bother to put soda in the top where, it was bisque temperatures. It just didn't make sense to me. And you can see there's cracking along the edges of where the channels were and the edges where the bricks meet. That's sort of a guide, like whenever you come back to fire these again, you need to rewash them. Come back, add another layer of this, so just a thin layer each time. Those cracks, fill them up, because that's where the soda will sort of eat into, all right? And you sent that brick around, didn't you? Go ahead and send that. No, go ahead and send that brick. We're going to send this brick around, and it might take a while to get to you, but it shows this is a brick that's been through 3 firings, and this last firing, I intentionally just dumped soda like right on it to see what would happen to it. And it's half coated with our working potter's wash and half, left bare. So you can see a definite line where soda is starting to eat into this soft brick and where the wash is starting to actually protect it. So take a look at it and see what you think. So next iteration, I'm going to go quickly through some of these. I decided I was going to do this sort of serpentine thing. I was going to blow in through both my burners through one side and pack it sort of like this, where, try to get that airflow to move this way. And I thought, maybe that'll hold some of that heat in. Maybe I'm losing too much heat out the top. Turns out I choked it. And so just as soon as I tried to put it in reduction, didn't work. Just black smoke just chugging out of the top. So it was just, I thought I had the answers, didn't have the answers. So halfway through the firing, it's like, what do you do? Well, I can shut it down or I can start to play. So you get out the gloves, you get out the protective gear, you shut things off, open ports, and start blowing fire in different ports and see what happens. Seriously. What I found, though, was once I shut one of the lower ports down and opened one up here that, I had my burners staggered, it started getting hot here. Started getting hotter down here. And I got, cone 9 here, cone 10 here, and cone 6 here, which is really strange. 9, 10, 6. So again, wasn't the greatest firing, very little control of reduction, but I hit that temperature, the temperature that I was looking for my palette glazes. So burner's shooting in. This is a little makeshift thing. So when you guys do this, it rains every time I fire this kiln for some reason. And so that's how I take care of that. That's the bottom of the Paragon that we'd taken off. I just pop that on top. It works just fine to keep the rain out of it. And so that's what that kiln looked like. The second iteration of it, there's a burner port that I put up top. It was actually a part for draw rings, so I could start to, try to see how much soda I actually have on pieces. And this is my final sort of version, or at least the last version. It's going to change again, and it's going to continue to change again until I get things figured out. But this shows you the staggered burners. I got a burner coming in from this side, burner coming in from this side. And this was the smoothest firing I've had so far. All right, so all the way up to 2,000 degrees, it was even. It was wonderful. I was thinking, man, I got it this time. All right. But so I had cone 010 down on bottom and 010 down on top. They're falling at the same time. Put it into reduction. It worked perfectly. The reduction, just like a normal updraft would. So, that was a win for me. So I had control over that now. Now, I was getting it up to temperature. Down low, it was getting cone 8, we're coming down. Cone 6 looks like it's getting a little soft on top. And so I start, throwing in soda. And then I'm realizing that this is starting to stall out again. And so I've got to fight it and work. And, at some point in time, you can't make changes too fast. You got to make a change and you got to sit with it and see if that helps. Or you make another change and see if that helps. And what I did was, it was so even throughout this that I decided I'd go ahead and pull off that side burner now and go all the way down to the bottom and just rocket ship it, turn it all the way up and see what happens. Well, I got to probably cone 11, maybe even cone 12 down on the bottom. I melted my shelf on bottom, okay? I got some good work, I think, but and how I started to dump soda in this was, because I really don't like to spray soda. And, he has a really unique way, and he's going to tell you about that. But what I do is I take a piece of an electrical conduit that has a bend on it, and I cut it to where it's like a shape of an L, put a funnel on top of it, and I pour soda solution right directly onto a soda brick and let it or on a hard brick and let it volatilize off of the top of that. So, I was pouring soda in this. I poured probably half a gallon of soda solution into this, very heavy soda solution. And I was happy with the results that were coming out. I mean, I've got flashing, I've got glassy surfaces, and in some cases I've got carbon trapping on those soda surfaces. So while it's not perfect, I have my next idea, and it may get me closer. So James has a unique way of talking, or of using his kiln. So we're going to let him talk about his. And go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So that happened. All the problems Jeffrey has experienced, I experienced as well. Uneven firings, difficulties in controlling my reduction, and I'm using wood. So in a kiln that small, there is no possible way, as I found out, when you put wood in there, that you're going to control your reduction. You're not. You're just not. And so with that, I have one burner in there. Natural gas burner, small, just enough to bring me up to about 1,800 degrees. At that point, I start to introduce wood. Now with soda firing, I don't like spraying either. It's nice, but it's not my preference. So with the development of how I was introducing wood, my inability to control the reduction, I decided that in true soda, I was going to soak my wood in a briny solution of soda ash and baking soda. Soak it in there about 5 minutes, take it out. I now have wood that's permeated with my soda ash. From there, I'll alternate between just putting dry wood in and then a piece of this soda solution. That being said, I don't want to drop my BTUs too much because I'm just putting in wet wood over and over again. So I need to alternate to make sure I just don't kill the heat work I've done. In order to get the surface treatment that I like, I had to go through many firings. I had many failures. The first time I fired it, and even in that firing right there, I puddled cone 13 on the bottom. Like, it wasn't even down. It was like, is that 13 anymore? And at the top, I was 10. But that meant I destroyed the bottom of my kiln, basically. You know, if I kept firing that way, those walls, regardless of how much I treat it, is going to become glass and eventually completely fail. The way I could protect the bottom of that kiln is I started making my own kiln shelves and developing a process for that. The alumina clay shelves that you can get aren't thick enough. They're really not meant to consistently go to that 13 cone range. And I know on the bottom there, if I'm melting 13 and I can't read 13 on it anymore, I'm past 14. You know, that's not sustainable in most kilns. Unless you're in a train kiln or an anagama, then you can do that. But in this environment, no. It's going to destroy this kiln in the long run. So what I ended up doing is making a lot of alterations. After about 12 firings, I ended up finding something that works, and works fantastically well for what service I'm looking for. It was the combination of slow introduction of wood, slow introduction of soda, and finding that balance point. And I accepted that I couldn't control reduction. It's impossible the way I'm doing it. So I stopped trying, and then I down-cooled. And during that down-cooling process for about 4 hours, after I reached 2100 degrees to 1800, that's the range I work in, I introduce small pieces of wood in the very bottom of the kiln, and I get a very controllable reduction on that way. And it allows me to get actually different marks than I would with an up reduction, in which I actually found I preferably like that down cool scenario. And there's many options of research and ways you can go about it from there. I found my own way. Jeffrey's found his own way as well. During this process, we have a few photos that I'd like to show here about what ends up happening to these rings. This one here is from one of Jeffrey's rings. Jeffrey, do you want to say anything? Come on up. Yeah, let's just switch.
Yeah, this wall right here, I intentionally was spraying soda right on it to see if I could melt it. And it's covered in our, working potter's wash. And, you could see it just splattering off this wall. I probably did it like 10 times. And so that's what it looks like after just sort of really an intense sort of barrage of soda. So
this is post 12 firings. They work. That being said, the reason I have such dramatic flashing is I did put salt in it. And it can do that, but the problem is salt will show you every weak point in your kiln. So you've got to maintain it. On the bottom left, you'll see the ports that I used, introducing gas and wood from the bottom. From there, really, the entire process, as Jeffrey explained, of building it, maintaining it, and finding your way through it, and the temperature range you want to work at and what you can achieve in that range. And from here, Jeffrey, would you speak on this piece?
Yep. One of my pots, it's actually got Stephen Hill's Strontium Crystal Magic, which has a lot of, titanium and strontium in it. That's sprayed on the surface there. It's wonderful just by itself in wood kilns. And then it's got an amber celadon on top of it that, it's a runny amber. So you can see I'm getting some nice flashing on the surface, and then combination of that titanium sort of messing with that amber a little bit, getting that crystal growth. So.
This is where I ended with my research after I left KU. I was able to achieve that flash. I was able to achieve that fluxing at the top of the rim, which requires a really early and long introduction of soda. And it was 12 firings to figure this out. And an alternative kiln that really isn't meant to do this. And it's my hope that everyone here can take this information, use this, and produce something and share with us. Show us what you want. Show us what you wish to achieve.
And one final thing before we go, I moderate a Facebook group called Alternative Atmosphere, and there's not a lot of information on it right now, but there are several artists out there that are working in the ways that we are, and we're trying to get together and develop a discussion post-work. So if you guys are interested in doing this, or you guys are doing this, please join Alternative Atmosphere on Facebook groups, and we can continue this discussion. It looks like we're getting the axe, and so we're not going to have time for questions, but James and I are going to go outside, and if anybody wants to talk to us, we'll be out there. Okay, so thank you guys.